There it is. There it is.
Yeah,
There we go.
very good.
Good. Yes, we're going to get started. And um, my name is Guy Blood, and I'm the current president of the Edmonton Interfaith Center. And our topic today should be of interest to lots of people. It's buying sex and who pays. That should get a large audience. And these lunch and learn events have been in person in the boardroom at the office for a long time, years. But for the last 2 years, we haven't been able to do that. So we're doing it on Zoom now. And we're holding them, we're trying to hold them every month, which is great. And today we've got great speakers, and I'm looking forward to hearing what they have to say. But before that, I'd like to introduce Virginia and to give us a land acknowledgement. Tell us about Treaty 6, Virginia.
Well, on behalf of the center, now I'm pleased to say that and acknowledge that we are on Treaty 6 land, and it's a traditional meeting place, territory and gathering place and traveling route for the Cree, the Saulteaux, Black Forest, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. We acknowledge all of the many First Nations in our country, Métis and Inuit as well. And these people have followed, their footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. And I personally acknowledge gratitude and to the Indigenous people that over 130 years ago welcomed Ukrainian settlers and shared their knowledge with them and kept them from perishing in the freezing temperatures which they weren't used to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I'd like to call on, and I'd like to mention that Virginia is a board member and our current secretary, doing a great job of that. I'd like to introduce Netta Fillett. She's the office coordinator, and she will be our moderator today. Netta, go ahead.
Oh, thank you very much. And I see somebody's put in the chat asking to put the closed captioning on. Have we ever enabled that? We've never been asked before. I wouldn't have a clue. So, but thank you. We acknowledge, Parveen, that you asked for closed captioning. We don't know if we have that. I'm sorry. So I'm going to start with Kate Quinn because she spoke to us back in November on this topic, on the local aspect of this topic. And the November was Domestic Violence or Gender-Based Violence Awareness Month. And Angelica or whomever, turn off your microphone, please. Thank you. Kate Quinn has served as Executive Director of CEASE, the Center to End All Sexual Exploitation, since 1997. She works with a great team of dedicated board members, staff, volunteers, and individuals who have experienced sexual exploitation, as well as community, law enforcement, and government partners. She is the co-chair of Edmonton's Sexual Exploitation Working Group, a leadership group active since 2004, which raises awareness about the multiple impacts of sexual exploitation, and she's coordinated since 1996 the Sex Trade Offender Program. Kathy King is an independent social advocate who retired in 2009 from clinical social work. Her concern for broken and disadvantaged people became even more personal in the early 1990s when her then teen daughter began to experiment with drugs, developed recurring psychosis, and struggled with many challenges before disappearing from the streets of Edmonton in 1997. Her daughter's premature death has inspired Kathy to speak on behalf of vulnerable people who have no voice. Her long-term volunteer work includes developing a database of the missing and murdered women and girls of Alberta, and over 20 years of presenting at Stop the Sex Trade Offender Program in Edmonton and participating with the CEASE annual memorials. Earlier, she was also involved for many years with Edmonton's Victims of Homicide Support Society. More recently, Kathy has turned her focus to writing and social media. She launched her website, missingcara.ca, in 2018 and published a 4-part memoir, The Seasons of Life, to share her daughter's story. She also participated in the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry and the Red Dress Photography Project. She summarized this report on her website, continues to blog, and maintains her Missing Cara Facebook page to provide information about vulnerability, exploitation, trauma, and healing. She's currently collaborating on a Canadian anthology about commercial sexual exploitation. Now, we have a connection here with the Interfaith Center because in 2018, we hosted here the North American Interfaith Network, and the Red Dress Photography Project was one of our workshops. And Kathy, I think we met then, but it's
Oh, perhaps. I know I followed Mufti around for 2
yes, you and
years,
Mufti
and
Matthewson, who had took the best
yes, and
picture my
then
son and I
she,
have ever had.
yeah.
So I think we have met, and you were part of our fabulous conference here.
Okay, I didn't remember your
No,
name, but I
well,
remember meeting Audrey at some point
yes.
somewhere.
Well, and I know you take your fabulous Red Dress Project everywhere, and it's a brilliant visual, fabulous,
Oh, it was
fabulous thing.
Mufti was amazing. I just, it was a real
She is.
privilege to meet her and work with her for a
Oh
couple of
yeah,
years. Yeah.
she is. She is. I know her family a bit. So I'm going to put these two websites into the chat, and when we put this your websites into our chat, and when we put this on our website, we'll include the links to your
Okay.
website. And I'm also going to say, unfortunately, I have to leave right at 1, so we'll do the
Oh, that.
formal thank yous then. It's up to you all if you want to stay, if there's always a good conversation, but I do have to leave at 1, so I can give my apologies for that now.
Oh, okay. No
And thank
problem.
and you just said, you too, Kathy, you said you want to go first, and then Kathleen, so Kate, so off we go. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Netta.
Just before Kathy begins, just to summarize, at the end of the presentation in November, Netta asked, well, shouldn't we just totally decriminalize? And I said, that's a topic for another session. And so this session is today. It's very, very timely because right now our federal Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights is hearing presentations of whether to decriminalize, remove the protection of communities and exploited persons legislation. Kathy submitted a brief, CEASE submitted a brief, and many others did as well. So thank you very much for taking the time to learn about this very important topic and discussion underway in our country right now. Over to you, Kathy.
Okay, thank you. And my buddy is going to show my slides. Anyway, there he is. Okay. Okay, so here we are, March 14th. Thank you, Guy. And then I also had followed up with the land acknowledgement, but we can just skip over that because that's already been done. But I also do like to honor the loss of our missing and murdered Indigenous women and children, and join with the inquiry, and that'll be on the next slide when it comes, in calling on all Canadians to speak out against violence, racism, and sexism. Yes, I don't want to repeat what was already done. Okay, next one, please. Okay, so this is where my, okay, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. I don't know if it's just my slide. I see a black bar on the side. Is everybody else?
Oh, there, that's better. Thank you very much. Yeah, that took it away. It took it away on mine anyway. Are you okay, Kate?
Oh, yes. We should be able to see your whole slide without the black bar and without clicking through each one on the side. So I don't know if it can be corrected. If not, we just proceed with the smaller version.
This is okay because we can still see the people, or see little people. Sure. Okay, so my story starts just over a year ago, around Christmas 2020, which is a year and a quarter ago already. Good friend of mine who I've worked with a lot, Andrea Hines, said to me, what Canada really needs is a really good anthology about sexual exploitation, and I think we can do it. Are you in? And I optimistically said, sure. Give me a couple months, because I had a few things planned up to a year ago. And then I said, my schedule should be reasonably clear after March 7th, 2021. So that was a year ago. And so I said, okay, we'll do it. So it's not a small task to agree to write a book. And then in the meantime, I came across a wonderful program which was called, it was a writing on purpose, but it was how to write a book in 4 months. And even I knew that wasn't possible, but I thought the course would give me some structure and project It's sponsored by Mike Cameron, who's a really interesting person and a whole story in and of himself. Anyway, so I started this course a year ago. I'm still with the course. The course has evolved into a support group of wannabe authors across Canada, and it's been a wonderful experience. And so early last year, we've created the basic structure. We are now working with an editor. Andrea was able to contact a number of guest contributors, and she was able to get us some funding, which is a big help. And so we're still fine tuning, and we're hoping, fingers crossed, that we will have a book ready for publication sometime this summer. So what I'm going to talk about is some of the ideas that we're hoping to present in the book. Okay, there we go. So I also just wanted to mention, I was looking up, January was first declared Human Trafficking Prevention Month in 2010 by President Obama. It took Canada 10 years to catch up, but February 22nd last year was the first time that we had a National Human Trafficking Awareness Day in Canada. So awareness is growing. And then I also acknowledge my daughter, Kara, who's been my inspiration for the last 25 years now, well, always, but who's been gone for 25 years almost. She was a young woman with a vivacious personality, an infectious spirit, and mild developmental challenges. Today, this would be called neurodiversity, as I've read more about that. I think, oh, that's a nice term. They didn't use it 25 years ago. She was a young lady who loved adventure and didn't understand danger. And as was mentioned in my introduction, she began to experiment with substances in her teens, which led to intermittent psychosis. She was in and out of Alberta Hospital. It was difficult for her to find housing. She fell through the gaps of many, many services. She ultimately, or through all of that, was intermittently exploited and ultimately disappeared from the streets of Edmonton. So I acknowledge her, I honor her, and my work of the last 25 years has been on behalf of young women like her, who bring joy to many people and deserve much more than they receive. Thank you. So just going back again, and this sort of ties into the whole idea of decriminalization. So we all have these kind of moments in our life that are sort of events that we don't remember. So I'm just calling this one Cleaning Up the Streets, 1995. So this was almost 20 years ago, but it just shows how attitudes have shifted and are slow to shift. Women have traditionally been stigmatized and criminalized for the behavior of consumers. So, you know, it's women have, yeah, anyway, that speaks for itself. The consumers have never been the focus. In 1985, 30 years ago, there was what they called soliciting legislation, which meant that women were charged for soliciting. And then that was replaced, which we thought was a good thing. So there was communicating became, this is a very, very simplification of the legislation, but communicating became the new law. So that the law was against communicating, which meant that the communication went both ways. So for the first time, consumers could be charged as well as providers, but this did not always happen. And if anybody remembers reading the Edmonton Police Service's website at the time, their philosophy at the time was that they were being fair, quote unquote. They were targeting an equal number of men and consumers and providers. So, so that was 10 years after the legislation changed. We've shifted again since then, but this is what I was dealing with 20 years ago. So this was one of the times that my daughter went to court. And when charges are placed against men or women, it's through stings. So in this case, so sometimes the police women will pose as providers and charge, you know, when the men are being charged. And when the women were being charged, it was the policemen who were undercovering as consumers, and then they would start up a conversation with a young woman, And if she indicated any interest in their conversation, then they would charge her with communicating. So this is what happened in 1995. My daughter was apparently standing on a street corner, emaciated, strung out. A policeman I don't know, approached her, harassed her until she, asking her how much she wanted, et cetera, et cetera. She refused to talk to him. He kept saying, well, just tell me how many $20 bills do I need if I go to the bank, et cetera, et cetera. She finally raised a few fingers, and then she was charged. So then she went to court, and this is a very apt of how I remember it. The policeman who was posing as the consumer was easily 3 times her age, 3 times her size, and yet she was the one that was charged. And I'm sitting there in court thinking, like, what is wrong with this picture? Doesn't anybody get it? There's a male crown, there's a male judge, there's a male consumer, and there's this skinny little spaced out woman, and she's the criminal, and he's the victim under the legislation at the time. So I think we've come a long ways. Anyway, that was in 1995. So we'll just kind of leave that and go on to the next slide, please. And the other thing that has prompted a lot of my work over the last 20 years, 25 years, is when she disappeared, and this prompted a lot of the missing and murdered inquiry as well. So at the time that my daughter disappeared, I as anyone would do, I phoned the police, and I phoned a number of times over the ensuing weeks, and sometimes I get a reasonable response, like, oh, we'll put out an APB, we'll put out an alert. If anybody sees her, we'll let her know you're looking for her, that kind of thing. And I assumed that there was some sort of ongoing record. And then I phoned one day midway and said, I asked for the missing persons unit, and I said, excuse me, this is who I am. Can you tell me what's happening with my daughter's file? And the gentleman said, there is no file. And I said, well, how can there be no file? I phoned several times. He says, well, there's no file. And I said, well, I want there to be a file. What do I need to do? So then he gave me another number, and he said, well, you have to file a complaint. And I said, well, I guess I thought mentioning it. Anyway, I didn't know that I hadn't filed a formal complaint. So I went to this other number. I filed a formal complaint. I got a file number. So I phoned back and I said, okay, this is who I am. This is my file number. Now what happens? And then the policeman that I talked to said, now we wait for a body. And that has stuck with me for, over 2 decades. And I thought, okay, well, then I can understand why you didn't have me do anything before if you weren't going to do anything anyway. But that was the police response 20 years ago when people went missing, or people from the street went missing. Now we wait for a body. And then in my case, September 1st, a body was found. That is the picture that was shown on the Edmonton Journal the next day, of 4 men in white bodysuits carrying a white body bag from the city, from the field. Just out in Sherwood Park, or just outside of Sherwood Park. And the only good thing about that time is that I didn't have to deal with the Edmonton City Police anymore. The RCMP took over the investigation, and well, maybe because at that time it was an investigation, but I certainly found the RCMP much easier to deal with at the time. So I acknowledge that this is a historical event. I would like to think that there's been an improved response across Canada since this time. But as I participated in a number of the missing and murdered Indigenous women events, this kind of story was repeated over and over and over many, many times, where family members tried to report someone missing and were discredited, or dismissed, or there's no records of missing reports having been filed. So it was, and I hope is less of a problem, but that's where we were 20 years ago. So that's kind of where I'm coming from in all my work. At the time, I was still had a day job. I've been employed the last 12 years, I believe. I've been happily retired the last 12 years, so I've had more time to do other things since then. Okay, so next one, I forget where I'm going here. Thank you. Okay, so unfortunately, it took me personal experience to teach me that terrible things do happen to vulnerable women and families, hence the book. So with the book, I just wanted to say it's an act of love. We hope to make money, of course, because we hope it'll be a good seller, but we have no intention of keeping any money. If we're so fortunate as to make money from the book, our intention is that any profits will go back to support education and exiting opportunities for women, and that the money will be channeled through charitable organizations such as CEASE. So our working title, and we won't know for sure till somebody hits a button that says print, is Buying Sex Who Really Pays. Subtitle is Canadian Stories of Exploitation, Survival and Advocacy. 2022 is still our goal. So and so as I've been writing and editing and consulting, and I've also been learning about marketing. So this is my so as I'm speaking to people, since in this is my 2022 project, I'm also practicing marketing my book. So anyway, I'm certainly open to feedback. If anybody has any suggestions about anything at the end, happy to hear it, because we want this to be a good seller. So the book, well, basically talks about 5 main categories, and those are they're listed. We talk about the sellers, we talk about the buyers, we talk about the impact on society, we talk about historical changes and social initiatives, and then we talk about best practices. So we have the 5 categories, and they're all interspersed with research and personal stories. So we have some survivor stories, our own stories, and contributors who've been kind enough to share their stories about their work along the way. So we do think it's going to be good, and we hope we hope our readers agree. Okay, then I'm just going to talk a little bit about each category, and I guess this would be the point for Kate to jump in at any time. I'm kind of watching my clock as we go. So part 1 is about sexual exploitation, and this is a big iceberg. We use the iceberg analogy because so much of what we talk about is the top of the iceberg, and we don't see what's underneath the iceberg. So what's at the top is the adult entertainment, escorts, dancers, the licensed body rub facilities, the XX porn rentals, which, like, they're all visible. Everybody sees them. Semi-visible is the street traffic, the independent workers, the private clubs, the phone lines, the sugar daddies, the personal dating ads, all that kind of stuff. It's there, but we don't really notice it. We don't really pay attention to it. And then underground, the whole part that we don't see. And this is, I guess this is just where the criminalization, if we decrim, all of this stuff becomes open for business. So we need, I think we need legislation to curtail that as much as possible. So underground, we've got the whole culture of commodification. We've got pimps, we've got traffickers, we've got women reduced to objects to be purchased. We've got desperation fueled by poverty and addiction. We've got exploitation of marginalized, vulnerable, traumatized, the underlying dynamics of social and economic equality. We've got the production of porn, and I have to say, it even upsets me to read about porn. Like, I've never watched any porn, but even reading about what porn is turns my stomach. So, and every once in a while I have to kind of clear my computer, because even to type in porn, then you get emails that you don't really want. But the things that apparently it's about these days, it's not just about sex. It's about slapping, spitting, brutality, gagging, bestiality, racism, violence, torture, bondage, sadism, masochism, urination, defecation, degradation, submission, and as they say, even reading about this stuff upsets me. I can't believe there's a market for it. There's a vicious cycle of yeah, and so it's what's happened through pornography is that there's this cycle of stimulation, which of course everybody or guys want the sexual stimulation, but it's become associated with deviant activities. And so that's what allows porn to perpetuate through society. It leads to increasingly perverse demands, suffering too painful for people to see, is how one survivor explained it. And then we also read about the targeting of women and children in poverty-stricken countries, which is, and of course that's happening now probably across Ukraine, as well as all these, as well as all the humanitarian aid floating, going to places like Poland. I'm sure that there's an equal number of traffickers, and even in Ukraine, and I've did a fundraiser for Nashi, that's what it's called. So previously, the house has since been abandoned, but a group of people from Saskatchewan had created a safe house for girls in Ukraine, because apparently in Ukraine, the system was so corrupt that traffickers would go around to the orphanages and offer to buy girls, especially girls who were graduating. So like, because once they were 18, they were legally adults, as they are here. And so traffickers would pay fees to the orphanages to have these girls released to their care. And it was just so bizarre. Anyway, this one group had created this one safe space for a number of girls who have now been evacuated to Poland, along with so many others. So there's just that targeting of children in poverty-stricken countries happens around the world. And I mean, we read about it, Thailand and Philippines, and anywhere where there's been tragedies, there's traffickers go in. Cambodia, Germany, Puerto Rico. And then there's the dark web, where access to live action is not even recorded. And so in the dark web, apparently, and this is just, again, too bizarre to even imagine, but instead of renting a video, you get access somehow, time limited access. So you get to watch your porn live. You get to watch people being tortured and sexually assaulted live, and there's no record. Once the session is over and you shut off your computer, there's no record that it ever happened. So these are some of the things that we're dealing with in our world. It's hard to imagine. Evil exists. There will always be victims as long as there's consumers. And that's the whole point, is that so much of our attention has been on the victims over the years. It's time to turn the attention to the consumers. Sex trafficking, 40 million is the 2020 stats presented by ACT Alberta. Nobody knows for sure how many people are affected. And as ACT Alberta says, Canada is a source country, it's a transit country, which means people come through country, and it's a destination company. So people are sometimes brought to Canada as well. So big problems. Okay, thank you. Next one. And then this is the underlying, this is still under part one. So the underlying issue of what we have called the vocal minority versus the common good. The vocal minority is the people who are saying, sex work is work, it's normal, why don't we just allow it? Why don't it, if it's like it's a natural thing, we should just allow it, and that would solve all our problems. Well, our position is that it would hardly solve any of our problems at all. Hypothetically, and this is where we have to be so careful with theory versus reality, and so much of the legal legislation happens at a theoretical level. So theoretically, consensual exchange between two equal partners is not exploitive. I get it, but that's not the case. I mean, that very, very seldom happens, that it's two equal partners. And so then we talk about, okay, well, then how do we reduce the harm if there's an unspoken reality of violence, desecration, trafficking, control, etc. So Edmonton, Alberta, as some of you probably are quite aware, along with a number of cities across Canada, have chosen to create bylaws that totally contravene the federal legislation. And I maybe jumping ahead of myself, and I'm not sure how much has been covered in previous presentations. In 2014, we have the Protection of Communities and Exploited Persons Act, which focuses on offenders, which makes the purchase of sexual services a federal offense. However, that has not been universally enforced. And as I say, cities around the world have opted to go with status quo, cities across Canada, I should say. And as in Edmonton, we have licensed body rubs. or well, they go under names as massage parlors, who knows what they are. Anyway, and the checklist is that, you know, you have to be 18, you have to attend a course, you have to, you know, check a little box saying that you haven't been trafficked. There's an alarm button that is activated in the place of service. There's a buddy system in place. There's, oh, the act. Okay, I will very slowly. The Protection of Community and Exploited Persons Act. PCEPA is what it is for short. Okay, so in our body rub systems, we have, yeah, there's supposedly they're creating better work conditions. There's rules posted that, you know, violence will not be terminated or will not be tolerated. You know, those kinds of rules you see in dentist's office and emergency. They're supposedly offering access to translators, health and social supports, resource information. Some of the propaganda, shall I say, even says there's reduced demand. I haven't quite figured out how they figured that one out. And that also it provides a secure income for the women involved. So this is very appealing on some levels. A number of our city councillors have supported that this is a good thing. And really you have to look at the big picture. So, I mean, is it a good thing that a certain group of women provide sexual services in a less dangerous atmosphere? Yes, that probably is a good thing. But that still is focusing on the women. It's not focusing on the consumers. And so these people that we're calling, I shouldn't say that. Anyway, the vocal minority, the people that we're referring to as the vocal minority are very strong. They're very compelling. They make a lot of noise. They've captured the heart of city council, and not just, well, I was going to say not just in Edmonton. Winnipeg recently reversed it. Like, so yay, Winnipeg. It's the only city in Canada, as far as I know, that has reversed that bylaw. Anyway, so of course we support safety and free choice for women, because we have to, because so much of the argument is couched in those terms, and they're terms that you can't deny. But the challenges of the harm reduction model, some of the things they don't look at, are that there will never be enough women to voluntarily meet the demands, especially if you look at the demands. Well, even if it was just sex, there wasn't enough women to voluntarily. But when you start looking at the extra degradation that has come through pornography, like, yeah, no, why would any woman ever sign up for that? And oh, this is just a little bit of an aside. Like in Germany, where prostitution has been legalized, some of the stories that come out of Germany are just mind-boggling, disgusting. Like, you can have drive-throughs like where you can get a beer and a blowjob, you know, like, and you can pre-order it, you know, it's just, and that's minor, you know, but those are things we can say in public. But those are the kinds of things that legalization, decriminalization opens it up to, that kind of widespread banalization, is what one person calls it, from Germany. Do we have a question? I'm sorry. No. Okay,
No, but Earl, could you mute yourself, please? Earl? I'm asking Earl to mute himself. Sorry.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. I'll just carry on. So the other challenges of the harm reduction model is there's no provision for outreach to the people who would not qualify to be licensed. So anybody that's involved in addictions, anybody that has a criminal record, anybody that's under 18, and there are a lot who have been exploited. So there's a whole number of people that would be not eligible for licensing, and those the city has not really addressed how we help those people. Licensing renders harm invisible. There's no consumer accountability. The violence and degradation of the porn culture are not considered. And then at the end, this is the legislation that I mentioned earlier. The buyer protection that the city of Edmonton presently provides blatantly violates the PSEPA legislation, which was passed in 2014. Okay, we can go ahead. I'll just pause for a minute. Did you have anything to add, Kate? We're going into part 2 right away here. We've got 20 minutes here. Okay. Okay. I'll just carry on. Oh, no, back up. Oh, no, we're good. Part 2. Yeah, just stay there for a minute. Thank you. Okay, so then we take our second part of our book, second part of our consideration is who are the consumers? So then we're looking at, we're looking at the fact that without demand, there would be no sexual exploitation. And surely, I'm thinking, yes, surely we the audience expect more from our partners, our brothers, our main children. And it really upsets me that my city councillor is a woman who's very passionate that women should be allowed to sell sex, and I'm thinking, okay, but for every time you say that, that means that you're assuming that men are allowed to buy it, and really, is that what you want for your husband and your child? Anyway, the numbers are shocking. Conservative estimates are that 15 to 20% of North American males are sexual consumers. I have to add that it's been hard to get some of these numbers, and some of these numbers are based on older studies. So these are very, very conservative estimates. So and that's 1 out of 5, that's 1 out of 8 to 1 out of 5. So if 15%, so based on 15%, and based on a Edmonton metro population of 1.5 million, that means that there's close to 100,000 consumers in Edmonton. And most of these are employed. Most of them pay taxes. They're obviously well protected by city council, and we have to wonder if some of them are not represented. And we have a primarily female council right now, but in the past, you got to wonder. It's obviously status quo is well established, and status quo is protecting sexual consumers. And so I guess the question we have to ask, and who really pays, is this really serving society well? And my answer is no. The world population, again, just using similar equation, 500 million consumers around the world. So we're dealing with a big problem. There's a world of economic disparity, racism, poverty, trauma, child abuse, coercion, debt bondage, grooming, pimping, trafficking, all of which play a role in creating providers, and all of this is fueled by a growing demand for violent pornography. So kind of discouraging. Okay, then part 3, and then we've got 15 minutes. So unfortunately, we have to skim over all these points. But again, we're hoping that the book will address all of these in more detail, and it will. But even then, you can see that it could be a course. So the societal implications, gaslighting, health, justice, and use of language are just 4 of the subtitles that we've hit. So gaslighting is when legitimate social protest is silenced by the status quo, and that's what we see happening a lot. Empowerment is labeled as a feminist right. Sexist work is claimed as an ideology, and that's the vocal minority that we're talking about. Even ACT Alberta had a presentation last year that reported that abolitionists were Debbie Do-gooders, and I was just absolutely infuriated when I saw that, and had a little bit of a discussion with the director. She was an acting director and the chair of the board, and just said, like, this is an organization that is supposed to be educating Albertans about human trafficking, and you're talking about Debbie Do-gooders as people that are questioning the value of sex, Anyway, so gaslighting happens at many levels. We have to be very, very careful of that, and I don't want to label anybody, but it was a shock to me to see how the gaslight, how ideologies can infiltrate what we think is public education. The health implications are phenomenal, over and above the physical and mental trauma that's experienced by sellers. And there's just so much literature about how badly women can be damaged. There's a whole thing about how relationship expectations are distorted by porn, that young men and young women who who watch porn sort of start to question, is this really what boys want? Is this really what women want? Is this really how we're supposed to be attractive to each other? The justice, the whole justice system tends to be male dominated. Traditionally women have been criminalized for being exploited, as we talked about already. And the danger of decriminalization, this comes back to where we started talking earlier, is that if commercial sex is decriminalized, then brothels become businesses. And like any businesses, it's like, there's advertising, there's cut rates, there's if it's decriminalized, no matter what, there's always somebody undercutting the market, so if you want to pay $200 here in a more of an upscale establishment, there will be somebody down the street selling it out of their garage for less, or the equivalent thereof. So it's just, and that's what's happened in Germany. And anybody that reads anything about Germany, you just have to give your head a shake and think, we do not want that in Canada. Please God, we do not want that in Canada. And so with language, we have to be careful of the ideological distortions, because we hear so much about the sexist work that's promoted by the vocal minority, and then the other side, those who've been exited it and can look back with a more thoughtful perspective, say it's paid rape. It cannot be called anything other than paid rape. And do we really believe that consent can be purchased and that payment justifies violence and degradation? And the irony is that so often payment isn't even made to the women. The payment is made to the pimp or the trafficker. And somehow there's this myth that exists that, oh, well, if I paid for it, I can get what I want. And so that's something else we have to question at the societal level. Okay, better hurry up here a little bit. Okay, next one. Okay, part 4, we just talk a little bit about the historical transformations. This is kind of yeah, it's okay. We'll get there. Well, this is my theme. Women have been stigmatized and criminalized throughout history. This theoretically changed in 2014 with the legislation which criminalized the purchase of sexual services. Some of us saw that as revolutionary, like yay. It's what's called the Nordic or the equality model, which began, the first country in the world was Sweden in 1999. And it's spread to a few countries. It's still a minority in the world, but it is happening. And it just presents such a dramatic shift. And we were, there were some of us that were so excited that Canada adopted that. And it was conservative legislation. The liberal legislation has dismissed it as partisan. There's just a whole political history. Shortly after the legislation passed, the government changed. We've been liberal ever since. And so the legislation has not been consistently enforced. And as per the liberal political promises, they're now reviewing the legislation. And so we don't know what'll happen, because probably there won't be any. Oh, we just don't know what'll happen. It's all up in the air right now. So we don't have time to talk about that. We talk about some of the community initiatives. CEAS, of course, has been an exemplary agency across Canada that has offered a number of unique programs. So we talk a little bit about that. We could probably write a whole book about CEAS. Alberta, and then on the provincial level, some of the things that have happened is that we have legislation to protect children. That's good. That happened since 1999. And on the international level, at the United Nations level, in year 2000, so that's 20 years ago already, 22 years ago already, there was the Palermo Protocol called for the world to recognize and prevent human trafficking. Canada signed on in 2002, so we're 20 years that Canada has been a signatory to this protocol, and yet what we have done can be challenged at many levels. And so we're a little bit embarrassed that Canada hasn't been a stronger you know, although we signed, we could be doing more. And as I say, it took till 2021, it took till last year till we had a first National Day of Awareness. A day of awareness is just a day of awareness. Awareness needs to be followed by action. So we have a lot of work to do going ahead. Okay. And then part 5. Okay, here we are at the end, and we've got 10 minutes, so we're good. And then we just kind of end with maintaining momentum. What are some of the things we need to do going forward? So we have a chapter on the inquiry, which again, the inquiry book, the inquiry, if anybody's read it, is like 720 pages, and it's a wonderful document, but it's a lot of hard reading. And I, on my website, this is a little bit of an aside, missingkara.ca, 2 years ago, you'd have to kind of scroll through the, if you go to the blog and scroll through the topics, you'll see I took about, I did about 6, I think I did about 8 blogs sort of interpreting the inquiry results. So it's took my 720 words and brought it down into a couple blogs. So the inquiry is something that's still unfolding. It's calling on governments to recognize women as sacred, which is a whole new concept, sort of going back to the whole Indigenous history of women's being treated as sacred. Colonization sexualized them, criminalize them, and so we just have so much work to do at all levels of government to prevent violence, racism, and sexism. That's kind of a long chapter. Then we talk about men who are challenging toxicity, and so we've got some really, I wish it was a longer chapter, but we've got some really interesting things about some of the initiatives that men have started. We've got, and then we've got a little section about some of the survivors and the exited voices. And so the exited voices are people that have been caught up in sexual exploitation, whether voluntary or otherwise, and who are able to look back at their experience without defensiveness. And that's so different than the vocal minority are people who are actively involved, and they're saying, we have a right to do this. And nobody's questioning that, but we're just saying we need to look at what's happening with the consumers. Like what are the, you know, this is like, who really pays? What is happening when consumers are allowed this kind of access? So the survivors are the people that have been there, done that, and are looking back, and too often their voices are being dismissed, and that's really a shame. So we have a section about, we have a whole chapter on the survivors and the exited voices. And then we just end up sort of looking at best practices, and I'm still putting this all together. Well, it's been written, but I mean, best practices can happen at so many levels. So, you know, optimal protection of children, developing education and legislation to discourage the demand for sex, and teaching consent from you know, from the very, very beginning of what does it mean to respect, and what does it mean to have an equal relationship, and what does consent mean in relationships, and all that kind of thing. So that, I mean, those are things that can be taught to children. And that's sort of another challenge I've thought of, as how do we translate this into child-friendly language, ensuring a full range of supports to enable exit options, and even to prevent people from having to make that terrible choice of having to sell themselves. So we need a whole range of prevention options, and we need a whole range of exit options. So as so many survivors have said, like, making the decision to quit is one thing, but to sort of follow that through and have supportive options to sort of change their life around is a big challenge for many women wanting to get out of the system. And then finally, just the global, and it comes back to spirituality, which is really interesting, because there's no real way that we can fight exploitation, I think, without recognizing our common spirituality. And so we didn't start with that, but we sort of end with that there really needs to be a global recognition of common spiritual connections, which of course do not allow for disrespect and degradation. So that's kind of the end of our fifth part. We have 20 chapters, 4 chapters in each part. So and then summary again. I've got 2 summaries because I have trouble ending. What can we do? We can and sometimes I always like to leave people with ideas because people feel discouraged. Like, what can we do? We can nurture healthy children. We can educate ourselves. We can build networks. We can let politicians know. And this is something that I think is so important, that politicians will only act on what they hear. So we all have the job to let our politicians know how we feel. Thank you for all of those who are already making a difference. And I think I had one last final comment. Oh yeah, my dancing ladies are at the end, but thank you very much for this opportunity. Yeah, we look forward to having people help us promote our book when it comes out. And kind of the theme is none of us can be truly free until all of us are truly free. So thank you very much for your attention today. And we didn't leave very much time for questions, but Kate and I will both be here as long as we need to be. Thank you.
Wow. Well, Kathy, that was pretty overwhelming. I'm almost speechless, which does not happen. Thank you. Thank you. As soon as your book is published, we would be very happy to promote it on our website.
Thank you.
We've never done that sort of thing, but since the money is going to a not-for-profit cause, absolutely, Guy. I think there's no reason for us not to do that. Yeah, absolutely. That was incredible. Now, Parveen had a question earlier on. She wanted a specific act named, but I think you did later on say what that act was. It's about
Yes,
halfway
I mentioned it.
through.
Yeah.
And there's a comp chat from Parveen. Yes, she did. So she got it. Yeah. Kathleen. Yes. Oh, you're mute. No.
Thanks. I would just like to kind of make 3 points. One is the recruitment and trafficking of girls and women and boys from Ukraine and Romania and other poor Eastern Europe countries is for the state-sanctioned brothels in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and elsewhere. So it's all things are connected.
Yeah.
There's also a great flow of young Nigerian women up through Europe and through that trafficking network into the Western European brothels. So we just have to remember that. The other is the unfortunate partisanship around lawmaking in Canada. And what we do have an example called the All-Party Parliamentary Group to End Modern Day Slavery and Human Trafficking. I think that sexual exploitation should be treated as an all-party issue, not a partisan issue, because frankly, right now we have, the conservative government did pass this bill in 2014. The Liberal government's not sure where they stand. The NDP supports total decriminalization, and really nobody's looking at the suffering that really is part of it. 2 other things to leave you with is let's not give up the big struggle for women and for economic and social justice. So, for example, CEASE is an advocate for some form of Canadian basic income. Yes. Hawaii is the first state that passed a unique bill that will provide basic income to those who are sexually exploited and trafficked. We know that poverty is a driver for trafficking and exploitation. So let us champion these things. There is a bill before Parliament right now around basic income, as well as the move to $10 a day daycare. This is intricately tied to sexual exploitation. So many women turn to sexual exploitation and then are at risk of all sorts of horrors and trafficking because they just can't pay the childcare or university tuition or anything like that. So I do really want to encourage you to write to whoever your member of parliament is. In Alberta, we know that's mostly conservative with 2 NDPs and 1 Liberal. But don't let keep it just around a individual morality issue around a woman doing whatever she wants with her body. we have to tie it in to the social justice and economic justice issues and help us bring those to the fore as well. Thank you. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, I just want to reinforce that. Yeah, supporting women's right to sell implies that you're also supporting men's right to buy. And that's where I think we really need to turn the whole thing upside down. And it's not that, you know, I mean, people that have been caught up in sexual or survival sex understandably don't want to see their income threatened. But so we need to provide supports as well. And if we take away somebody's income, even if we don't agree with it, without replacing it, then that's doing a disservice to them as well. So it really, it's all tied in with building better social supports for women.
Let's chat a little bit more, but I think Netta has to leave, and I think she has a word or two to say.
Well, I just want to say thank you again, Kathy and Kate, and absolutely, if there are petitions to be signed, again, we would not send that from the center to our members. We've never done that, but I would send it to my friends individually. I would sign, but it has to be seen in the bigger picture. You're absolutely right. It is a question of slavery. It is a question of poverty. It is not. It does not exist in a vacuum. And
Yes.
Guy and I are big supporters of the idea of an annual income, so we would see it as part of that as well. And it needs to be framed differently. I think a lot of us, of a certain age, we grew up in those Italian movies, Never on a Sunday, and the thinking that prostitution was. I mean, we may have actually kind of almost a romantic view of prostitution for some people who. So we need to open people's eyes to the big picture and absolutely to the slavery aspect and the true face of it.
Yeah,
Yes, thank you.
You're very, very welcome. Yeah, what might have been romantic is the tip of the iceberg. Yeah.
Yes, and it probably never was. It was in some. I'm sure it never existed. I'm sure it never ever existed.
Yeah, well, just think about that movie, Pretty Woman. With Julia Roberts. That's just a bizarre thing, but just great that you're going to have a book. And I'm, for one, we will watch for it. And then maybe my ladies league, I'll just say every branch president, like we need to, it's wonderful to have you to educate, and then to have this book, that's a way to get the word out. And so often, we make choices and you get a book that has to do with religion, but for social justice, we really
we're hoping, yeah.
And who will publish it? And it'll be paperback, do you think?
Oh, probably. We're still at the editing. Yeah, I would assume. I don't think hardcovers sell. Yeah, we'll be working with our publisher, and I don't know.
Well, good luck with that.
The editing stage.
Audrey.
Yes, I just wanted to say I hope you make it financially able for us to get sets of them for group study with the church.
Well, I'm thinking $20 paperback. We want to keep it affordable for sure. We want to keep it readable. We want to target a general audience, even though there's a lot of academic references in it. The fact that it's interspersed with personal stories, kinds of keeps it more, what's the word? More at the public level. Yeah. So it's. Bye, Netta. She's gone. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, Kate. Sorry.
Thanks so much, Kathy, for coming. And
my pleasure. It's been an interesting year, and we're on the home stretch, but we still still have a couple more hurdles to cross.
But I sent you a message in the chat.
Oh, I missed it. Sorry, I have trouble looking at two things at once. Okay, I'll open it up. Oh, there we go. Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, okay. Hot off the press. Yeah, we will be, hopefully with any luck at all, planning a book launch for, I don't know, August, September, somewhere around there. Probably
get the Raging Grannies involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well,
we do have creds,
Yes, I know. Well, and Kate is such a wonderful organizer. So, well, I now that we can do it publicly, anyway, that'll be our challenge for the summer. With any luck at all, that'll be our challenge, planning our book launch. So we're doing promotion. Yeah.
Okay.